Hello, and welcome to the third video of our series, Core Strength, Developing Your Documentary Through Application Writing. This video starts the section about producing decisions. So we'll cover accountability, safety, through optional accessibility, and even talk about your filmmaker statement and key creative personnel questions. So all the questions in the middle of the core application right before the financing plan. So these questions are probably somewhat unique to US funders, but we do consider them important questions for all productions. These are questions that you should be asking yourselves anyway. These questions are really asking you to consider why you're making this film and how you're making this film and kind of how they relate to each other. So specifically for connection and point of view, we're really moving away from why are you the best person to tell this story? Getting away from the superlative because many people can tell the same story. But we're really asking why are you in particularly interested in this story and how did you come to know it, right? So it could be a personal story about yourself. It could also be that you're interested in a particular area or theme. And so these questions really get at asking you, how are you connected to this film and what's your point of view on the film topic? Then for accountability and community care, we really want to make sure that you are to understand the relationship that you have with your participants and the community that you are including in your documentary. So a lot of times when we as documentarians approach a certain person to be a part of the film, they might be excited that they're getting included in a film. A lot of people want to be in film, but they may not actually know what the process will entail, how long it will take, that possibly they may not have control over the way they are seen or perceived by audiences. And so this really asks for you to detail how you are going about the process of making sure that you're communicating with your participants about what the experience is going to be like. For this specific question, we really recommend that you use one or two examples of places that you can describe how you are relating to the participants and that you avoid overgeneralizations. Be really specific to your film. So for example, a lot of people when answering these two questions, they think, oh, we're asking about the relationship between you and a community that maybe you don't know. But this question relates to any film that you make. So even if you're making a personal film and you're interviewing your mother, um, there's a different relationship that you're entering into once she becomes the participant and not just your mother, right? So there are things that you have to consider around the production and the way you relate to your mother. If you're, for example, living with her, right? Does that mean you're allowed to film her any time of the day, at any point? You have free range over her life, or are there rules? Are there boundaries? Are there times that you will be filming with her and then other times that you won't? So these are all the questions that can be asked even of a personal or close relationship that you have. Um, and then the last question in this section is really asking about safety and security. And certainly there are some films where safety might be more explicitly considered. Let's say if you're documenting in a war zone, that might be, very clearly you have to consider like physical safety, right? But every single film has a safety consideration. Much like journalism, we want to ensure that films minimize potential harm. So we want to encourage everyone to seek out the truth and make those truths available for the public. We really believe that this is an essential right for us, but we also have to understand and mitigate safety concerns that are part of that can be a part of the production. And this is part of a filmmaker's responsibility to not enter into spaces without really understanding what is the risk involved in making the film. And it can be many different types of safety. So it could include digital safety, like someone being doxxed or, harassed on social media. Could be physical safety, like the example about documenting a war zone. It could be legal risk, right? You might be telling some hard truths and then that some folks don't want out there. And so the production might be sued. So that's an area where you want to ensure that you have insurance and you have lawyers on retainer to really protect the production. So these questions, all of three of them, don't have a long word count. So it really is about choosing one or two examples that stand out specifically for your production so that the reviewer, the person who's reading the application, can understand, oh, this person's aware, right? They're documenting in a war zone. They are aware of the physical safety concerns. This person is documenting with children. They are aware of what kinds of harms could potentially come to children if, they're being asked to work or, be in the film for an extended amount of time. So you really want to consider all different facets, but focus on one or two because the word count is so small. That just really illustrates sort of how you're thinking about producing your film. Um, and then actually we have a really great example from that same film that we introduced in the first video of this series, the film There Was Not by Emily McCreachian. And I'm just going to read it out loud because I think it's very helpful. So this was her answer for accountability and community care. She says, the participation on this film the participants on this film have always been vocal activists in their own communities for their own views and opinions. We don't have concerns about the release of the film causing any physical, material, or digital risks to them or their families. In relation to the trauma we experience and the risk of re-traumatization, we are always in constant active conversation around this theme and trying to find organic, collaborative ways to heal the trauma instead of letting it hurt and control us. Our method of doing this is by allowing them to take control of a narrative they feel they're constantly erased from. So, this is a great response because it really speaks to the fact that Emily's aware that any sort of exposure brought to activists in a certain conflicted territory can bring them harm. But she's also aware that the film is not actually exposing these activists. The activists themselves have chosen to be on the platform. And so it's something she's aware of, but it's not necessarily something that production-wise is being mitigated by her team because the participants themselves have already made these life choices for themselves. And then that second part where she really talks about having traumatic experiences and then having the film ask about these traumatic experiences might cause some re-traumatization. And so she talks about the methodology of how to deal with re-traumatization, right? And so it's not that everyone has to have a therapist on set. That might not be right for your production. It might not be something that you want to or could include in your budget, but the way that she's dealing with it is through something we could broadly call like narrative justice or just giving them the opportunity to tell their stories and own their stories, right? That's actually a way to mitigate some of this re-traumatization, and she lists that out pretty clearly.
So the next question we have in this producing decision section is creative control. We know past core apps, this question has been pretty confusing, and so we've tried to reword it to make it really clear as to what it's actually asking. And so it's actually asking who has legal ownership of the project. We're usually looking to see that it's a director or producer, maybe a combination that has some type of ownership of the project. And you don't need to explain participant dynamics here. That can be discussed in previous sections that Maria went over. And it's okay to answer this in 1 sentence, 2 sentences max. The next question we have is project stage and timeline. So the two things here, you want to make sure that your current stage is very clear. That often has to do with eligibility. And then you want to outline your film's entire timeline. So you don't want to start with where you are now, but you want to go at the very beginning, research and development, all the way through release. And this is because we're looking to see what you've done so far, how long you've been working on the film, and then your future plans. We want to see if they're realistic, if your release date is realistic, you're setting enough time aside for production and editing and so on. Lastly, we have accessibility, and this is asking how are you making the film available to disabled audiences, but also during production for crew and participants. Our main tip here is that it's better to list what you're specifically doing on your project rather than try and write everything possible that you could be doing. That may not be realistic. It's better to be specific about what's happening with your project. And so examples of things you could be doing are creative captioning, breaks and rest for crew, and more accessible viewing options after the premiere. If you're not sure where to start with this question, Forward Doc has a great toolkit that's a good resource, and we'll link that down below. And then the final thing with this question is that anything listed here, the costs for that need to be reflected in your budget. So reviewers are checking to see that you've allocated funds in order to actually be able to do these accessibility measures.
All right, so now we are down to the filmmaker statement and key creative personnel, which we do somewhat consider part of your producing decisions. So these don't actually exist in this consecutive order. We put them here because filmmaker statement and key creative personnel often get mixed together. They serve two different purposes, so that's why we're presenting them in one slide. Um, so the text from both of them are also from Emily's film, There Was Not, and you can read those on your own. But the filmmaker statement is really a moment for you to describe yourself as an artist in a holistic way. So you can mention the film that you're applying with, but you don't have to. This is really, really just asking you more broadly who you are as an artist, what types of topics you're interested, what kind of form you're interested, why are you interested in some of these things. It just allows us as a reviewer to get to know you as a person. Because again, with documentaries, we can plan all we want, but we always know we have to be ready for the unexpected. So it's better for us as reviewers to get to know you as a filmmaker so that we know what motivates your decisions whenever unexpected things come up. So the filmmaker statement is usually reserved for the director, sometimes the producer, really the person who's driving the main thesis of the film. Whereas key creative personnel are really asking you about your core team. So who the key creative personnel are, that's up to you. And so some productions might be like a two-person team. So it's really just the director and maybe a cinematographer. So you might only include two bios. Each bio is up to 100 words, so it's not a ton of information, but what we really want to know is how do all of these key roles interact with one another, right? So, for example, a filmmaker who might be more emerging might decide to crew up with a producer who has been able to complete many films before, because that might actually help to balance out the experience within the key creative personnel, right? Or maybe your editor is incredibly experienced. So this really helps us see sort of out of the team who's making the creative decisions, how is everyone interacting with one another? You can also include consultants. We've seen consultants be included in this. It just allows us to get to know the crew a little bit more. But these are 100-word bios for each key creative personnel. So it's not like a filmmaker statement. It's basically just little short bios that you would submit for like a panel or when you have to provide bios for any sort of materials for like festivals. Um, so this is the end of the third video of the Core Strength series. You can find the other videos on documentary.org/videos.